People are dying, probably on a daily basis, from not understanding their ADHD, not being medicated for it if they need to be. It's got to stop.
My guest today is Sarah Templeton, a leading advocate for ADHD awareness, author, and campaigner for systemic change in education, mental health, and criminal justice system.
The word ADHD wasn't used in relation to me until I was 51, nearly 52. And I happened to be seeing a counsellor who had a couple of ADHD children, and she was also ADHD herself. And she said to me on the third session, has anybody suggested you're ADHD? And I said, no. Why? And she said, because I think you are. Go home and Google it. And I literally went home and Googled it, and my entire life made sense. And ADHD was not what I thought.
Undiagnosed ADHD is one of the most overlooked crises in modern society, especially within prisons, addiction centers, and homeless shelters. Essentially, some of the most vulnerable people.
In England, we've got pockets of prisons, pockets where they understand ADHD and pockets where they are screening, assessing, diagnosing, probably medicating. But we've got many, many, many more pockets that aren't, and that largely is because there's a real lack of awareness in psychologists, psychiatrists, even GPs working in prisons.
And now if you're medicated, does this kind of balance out? Shall we call that a cure? Is that what you're saying?
Yes. It's a cure. 100%. Any psychiatrist or doctor would tell you ADHD medication is the most efficacious of any medication, either psychological or physiological.
It's much better to just not diagnose them and say, you know what, you committed this crime, you're going to do 10 years. And then when you come for the second time and the third time, we put you in for life. And now we're guaranteed a certain income for the 50 years that you're going to be here. Welcome to Compassiviste Dialogues. I'm your host, Ali Horiat. My goal in this program is to educate our audience about various global issues and how we can help. My guest today is Sarah Templeton, a leading advocate for ADHD awareness, author, and campaigner for systemic change in education, mental health, and criminal justice system. Sarah's work is driven by a harsh reality. Undiagnosed ADHD is one of the most overlooked crises in modern society, especially within prisons, addiction centers, and homeless shelters. Essentially, some of the most vulnerable people. As the author of How Not to Murder Your ADHD Kid, instead, learn to be your child's own ADHD coach, she's helped thousands of parents and educators understand the profound impact that intervention can have on a child's future. Beyond writing, Sarah is actively working within the UK government's APPG for ADHD, pushing mandatory ADHD screenings in prisons and police stations so that we can break the cycle of crime in incarceration where it really isn't warranted. Today, we'll explore her journey, her advocacy, and the urgent reforms needed to change the trajectory of countless lives. Hello, Sarah, and welcome to Compassiviste Dialogues.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Great. Before we start, and generally people just rush into the topic, but before we start, I want to know, the audience would want to know, what is ADHD? How do you know you have ADHD?
It's not what most people think, including me. I was as ignorant as pretty much a lot of people seem to be, and I wasn't. The word ADHD wasn't used in relation to me until I was 51, nearly 52. And I happened to be seeing a counsellor who had a couple of ADHD children, and she was also ADHD herself. And she said to me on the third session, has anybody suggested you're ADHD? And I said, no. Why? And she said, because I think you are. Go home and Google it. And I literally went home and Googled it, and my entire life made sense. And ADHD was not what I thought. I thought, if I'm honest, I thought ADHD was kids that hadn't been brought up properly, hadn't been told how to behave and how to manage their anger, hyperactivity. And it was little boys. I just thought it was children, primarily boys, and children. So I was as absolutely ignorant as the rest. And I always say that, please don't think that I'm dictating and saying, oh, you should all know about ADHD. No, you shouldn't, because I didn't until I was nearly 52. But I think I kind of am a good example of how you kind of break the mold with ADHD. Number one, it's not just boys. Number two, it's not just children. It goes on for life. And number three, it's a different brain wiring, basically, very similar to autism. A lot of people have ADHD and autism now. That's sort of a growing thing that people have realized they've got both. But ADHD is, it's primarily ways of thinking. We have certain ways of thinking and we have certain traits, and we also have certain coexisting conditions. So things like dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, all of those are coexisting conditions of ADHD. So it's a whole, they always say with ADHD, it's a big umbrella and a lot comes under it. And that is so true, that the further on I've gone with my journey, which is now 9 years old, because I was nearly 52, now 61. But I've met so many people who kind of dispel the myths. So one of the myths is that you're not very intelligent if you've got ADHD. You're a little bit on the stupid side, special needs and all the rest of it. But I run a really massive team of counsellors with ADHD in the UK, and some of them are phenomenally bright. They've got masters, they've got 3 degrees, they're absolutely phenomenally bright. So ADHD really it's just not what people think. You don't have to be a boy, you don't have to be a little bit gormless. You can be incredibly bright, incredibly intelligent, incredibly successful. There's an awful lot of very, very famous people with ADHD who've been phenomenally successful, but they've got ADHD. So it doesn't mean all the things that a lot of people think. Oh, you're going to be hopeless. Oh, you're going to be useless. Oh, you're going to have loads of problems and be a pain in the neck. It doesn't mean that at all. It just means that we have this different brain wiring and we have a lot of issues that come with it. But most of us, not all, manage to overcome it. We manage to overcome the issues. And because another thing, one of the traits of ADHD, we have more compassion than other people and we have more drive. So a lot of us, me included, we end up doing things that we're very, very passionate about. And so people who run charities, most, if not all of them, are ADHD, because we have this more compassionate thing going on. So there's loads of good things about ADHD, and then there's loads of challenges as well. But the one thing I will say, unless you've got it yourself, or unless you've got people in your family with it, or very good friends with it, it's pretty much always not what you think. Pretty much always. People, and I don't ever blame people for this, because as I say, I was nearly 52 until when I was told you've got ADHD, go home and Google it. Until that point, I'd never even thought to Google it. I'd never researched it, because why would I? It was just naughty boys that hadn't been taught to behave. And I'm absolutely appalled now that that's what I thought when I got it myself. But yeah, I'm honest. That's what I did think. And that's what a lot of people think, I think, and that's okay. That's okay. But I'm trying to raise awareness of what it really is, and also why ADHD people are more prone to these issues that we're going to talk about, because they are more prone because of the ways of thinking and because of the brain wiring. So that's what people, I think people find that very interesting, especially like when you talk about the link with addiction. They're like, wow, really? Okay. But they had no clue. And it's massively important that they do, because people, I hate to bring it down, but, people are dying probably on a daily basis from not understanding their ADHD, not being medicated for it if they need to be. People are losing their lives, and it's got to stop. We need to raise awareness in people who might have it and people who are working with people who might have it. That's the important thing.
Okay. And is there a quick test or a quick way for people to kind of analyze this? I mean, you know how you had no clue, and then, somebody kind of, raised awareness for you and you said, oh, okay, I'm going to Google it, and you went your way to figure it out. But is there like an, quick ABC kind of way to say?
Absolutely. Maybe... There's hundreds. Go online, just Google adult. That's the important word. Adult ADHD screener, and there are loads. There's one on my website. I've got 3 websites, but on my ADHD Liberty website, there's a free screener that marks itself, and then if you want to, you can email it to yourself or email it to your GP or whatever. So there's loads. It's not just mine. There's absolutely dozens and dozens. But if you think,
and we have that link at the bottom here, so people can go on that website.
Okay, it's totally free, and we've got a child one on there and an adult one on there.
Yeah,
so
both of them. Okay, great. We'll have that there. Okay. So we'll people do the screening, understand where you stand with this, and then throughout the rest of this, I guess the point of this show really is to bring out the things that are happening that people should be aware of, because it will really change their lives after hearing what you have to say about them. I'm going to start with the first one. And the first one is the prison system. You've been vocal about the urgent need for ADHD screening in police stations and prisons. Let's start with the system side. So, what is the scale of this problem, and why is it so frequently undiagnosed in offenders? Because I would have assumed that the judicial system would have access to this kind of screening to help people who are incarcerated this way. And then we'll get into the personal side of why people are prone to commit more crime when this happens.
I think in answer to the first bit of the question, that largely boils down to the fact that adults have only been diagnosed with ADHD for approximately 10 years. In some places they're a little bit more advanced. In the UK, it was 2009. Which is only like 6 years ago. So most adults went undiagnosed. So therefore, in the prison system, and I talked to quite a lot of people in Australia about this. I've talked to people in America, yet to speak to people in Canada, but very, very happy to. A lot of the staff are not aware, let alone trained. They're not aware that adults can have ADHD. Again, no blame attached, because when they were trained, they weren't trained in adult ADHD. Psychologists, psychiatrists training, most of them qualified before 2009, most. So they didn't know that adult ADHD was a thing. So why would they be aware of it? They just wouldn't, So in England, we've got pockets of prisons, where they understand ADHD, and pockets where they are screening, assessing, diagnosing, probably medicating. But we've got many, many, many more pockets that aren't, and that largely is because there's a real lack of awareness in psychologists, psychiatrists, even GPs working in prisons, because to get to the psychologist and the psychiatrist, you've got to prove to a GP that you need an assessment. So I've just written another book, actually. It literally came out this week, 3 days ago, and it's called The Prison Counsellor, and it's just chock-a-block with ADHD. When I started in the prisons, I didn't even know I'd got ADHD, let alone the boys had got ADHD. But now I hope my book is quite interesting, because it tells the story of how so many of them were not diagnosed. So many of them were diagnosed as children, and then some of them were taken off the meds, and then within a year they're in prison, and some of them used to say to me, oh, it's just all gone wrong since I was taken off the meds. It's just all gone wrong. So there's a real lack of understanding and training right from GP level and up, especially in the prison system. They traditionally I'd be very interested to know about Canada, actually, but I know this is the case in Australia, and I know it is in the UK. They have traditionally diagnosed offenders with personality disorders. So lots of different ones, often emotionally unstable personality disorder, histrionic, narcissistic, lots of different personality disorders, which I don't think is helpful. I don't think telling anybody that you've got a disordered personality is useful, irrespective of whether they're ADHD or not. I just don't agree with personality disorder diagnoses. I think they'll be dropped in the next 10, 15 years because so many people don't agree with them. But the trouble is, these psychiatrists and psychologists, especially in the prisons, they're very used to handing out these personality disorder diagnoses. I know boys that have got 3. They've been told they've got 3 personality disorders. They don't even know what they are. They don't understand them, but they've been told they've got 3. And they're not. They're actually ADHD. But the systemic problem, I'll just give you a very quick example. One of my young offenders took his own life 2 years ago, and I was at the inquest earlier on this year. At the end of last year, the end of 2024. And I happened to find myself in the court with 8 prison officers from his wing, from his prison, when he actually did what he did. And I ended up having them for an hour and a half. Now, they'd been told not to talk to anybody, so they couldn't answer me. And I literally turned around. I was in the row in front, and I thought, I've got 8 prison officers here. I'm not going to waste this opportunity. So I said, can I just ask, do any of you know much about adult ADHD? You can just nod or shake. And they all went, no. And I said, right, I'm going to tell you. And then I explained it to them, to the 8 of them. 2 of them ended up in tears. I showed them a picture of the boy that had taken his own life, and 2 of them, one of the girls, they did speak to me, actually. They mouthed it very gently. One of them said I was the one who found him, and the other one said I was the one who cut him down. And they knew nothing about adult ADHD. I'd been putting in safeguarding risk letters to the prison, 5 of them, and it was after that hour and a half of me talking to these prison officers who all listened avidly to everything I was saying. You know, they weren't dismissive at all. They were really like eyes wide open. And at the end, I said, be honest with me. Did any of you know any of that about adult ADHD? And every single one of them shook their head. And that was the day I realised this isn't just a person problem in the prisons. This is not an individual officers or suicide and self-harm officers, psychology. It's not the individual's fault. This is a lack of training in the whole prison system. Mm-hmm. And I've just come back from Australia, literally 4 days ago, and I had a couple of meetings there, with different people, but some of these people were from youth offending teams, some were from sex offending teams, some were from the police, some were from prisons or correctional, they call them correctional facilities in Australia. Mm-hmm. And I had, 2 or 3 of each of those at these different meetings. And again, everybody was massively interested, but massively unaware. So one of the youth offending ladies actually said to me, she said, Sarah, can I ask you, when I'd done about 2/3 of the presentation, she said, does this apply exactly the same to young people and teenagers? And I said, yes, exactly the same, but actually more so, because when you're a teenager, bearing in mind ADHD is connected to dopamine, and dopamine is a mm-hmm. hormone. So when you're a teenager and your hormones are racing around your body, as any teenagers are, if you add ADHD into the mix, it's massively impactful, massively. In the teenage years, it can either go really wrong or really right, but it goes really something because there's so much going on in your body. When I was a teenager, I never ever have hit anybody or punched anybody, but I was told in my teens that I had a dreadful attitude. Even my nan, who I adored, said to me, you make me feel this big. And I was mortified because I adored my nan. But this sort of hormone thing was raging around my body, and it just made me very, very, not quite aggressive, that's the wrong word, but too assertive. I was very, very, very assertive, let's put it that way. Mm-hmm. And I upset people 100% without knowing what I was doing. Now, other teenagers, when they've got these things racing around their body, they do punch people and they do punch things and they do let the rage out. I just had the rage inside, but some people let the rage out. And I completely understand that, having been that very angry teenager myself, I just never have wanted to hit people. I've hit things, I've punched walls and punched things where I won't hurt myself. I've punched desks. I've punched numerous computers. I'm a puncher, or I was a puncher, but not of people, never of people. I couldn't do that. But I do understand why people do, mm-hmm. I get it.
Let's stay with the systems for one quick question. We have a charity in the UK, Compassiviste Foundation. We have a charity in the US, Compassiviste Society. Mm-hmm. And, we deal with a lot of issues also with mental health and other things that are systemic issues that just the governments and the systems haven't caught up to yet. And I think largely because they really don't care to, they don't have to. Businesses do because, it's all about, can I make an extra dollar? So I'm going to listen to everything. I'm going to learn everything. There's money in it. There's profits. I'm going to make sure that I understand ADHD because the next game that I put out will make a lot more profit if I know my audience better. You see? So, but the prison system doesn't need to do that. I mean, you do something wrong, you go to prison, you come in there. They don't need to care. So I find there's 2 layers to this. One is nobody cares. 2 is, it's also an access and privilege issue where, for example, in the US, if you're in the city of New York, and you go to jail there, you're probably going to have access to doctors and, staff and other members of the prison system that are going to be, far more ahead because, the state just has more funding and has more, doctors moving there because wealthier people live there who can afford to go and see these doctors anyways, because, psychologists are not cheap. You go to poorer states, you go to New Mexico, for example, and I doubt that it will be advanced, or you go to rural areas, right? And then I think the UK as well. I'm thinking, London prison systems will probably have some doctors and some staff that are further advanced about these issues. But then, you go into the rural areas outside of Liverpool, for example, or Southampton, and all of a sudden it's like it's non-existent altogether. So are you seeing that, or?
No, to be truthful, no.
Okay.
Sorry no. I mean, I completely accept that could be the case in some places, not in England. It really does depend on who you've got working in the prison. So, for example, I met at the Houses of Parliament one day a wonderful psychiatrist who had worked in Leeds prison for 6 years, 6 whole years. And he said to me, Sarah, I was sitting there for 6 years, diagnosing them with ADHD all day, every day, for 6 years. And he said, I just couldn't do it anymore. And he said, I feel terrible because, there's hundreds it's just constant, this stream of people that are ADHD. But, I understood it because when I was counselling, I got to burnout point. I counselled for very roughly 8 years, I think it was. And then I got very, very burnt out because every story you've heard before, and it's difficult to be fresh with people. So I stopped then and I started writing books, which I just love doing. So as long as people are reading them, I'll keep writing them. But in response to what you said, it's not necessarily London, it just depends where there's a pocket. So, for example, there's a prison in Wales, in South Wales. And I know they've got a brilliant reputation for ADHD. It's a young offender institute and they are diagnosing and medicating in that prison. So it doesn't, I completely see your logic, but it doesn't seem to be that way in England. We have got brilliant staff in London prisons. I know some of them, they're absolutely brilliant. And the ones who are brilliant in the prisons tend to be ADHD or autistic themselves. So, for example, there's one prison that I know in South London, got a brilliant neurodiversity manager. She's ADHD and ASD. And she bends over backwards to help all those people. It's a big prison, but she bends over backwards to help all those people because she can see that, and she's got children as well, and she can see her kids going down that route if she's not very careful. So it doesn't, I don't think in England it counts. I will just say something about America though, while we're on this sort of geographical thing. Yeah. I've been contacted by 2 separate police forces in America, and both of them pretty much word for word said the same thing. And what they said was, we see what you're doing. We know that it's needed. We also know that our prisons are full of ADHD. And this is the bit that was word for the same. They said, but we are going to have a much tougher job of getting this into our prisons because America is so tough on crime. And I thought, oh my God. And when they had the second conversation, I said, oh, well, this is exactly what the other chap said. So they know, they do know. And when I watch an awful lot of television about prisons, an awful lot. And when I see the American documentaries, that it's so obvious that so many of these people have got ADHD, but they don't seem to be picking it up. I might be wrong, and I'd be overjoyed to be wrong, but I don't think they're picking it up in the American prisons yet. And when I was in Australia, as I say, they've started to. I spoke to New South Wales Police and I spoke to Queensland Police. Queensland Police have already started screening. They've been screening for nearly a year. They've got figures. New South Wales, not quite yet, but they're on the way. And there's a big awareness of it in Australia, really good awareness in Australia. And I think they'll be coming up second, because we're pushing it in England and we've pushed it so much in England now that it really is starting to happen. We're setting up ADHD support groups in all the prisons. We've got a 1-year National Prison Radio ADHD awareness campaign starting in September. Now, that ADHD awareness campaign isn't just for the prisoners. It is for them massively, but it's also for the staff. So we're doing 30 videos on all different aspects of ADHD that will be played at these support groups, and then they're going to be on the tablets in the boys' cell. So if they go and they go to an ADHD support group and it's all about addiction, let's say, and they watch the video and they think, bloody hell, this is why I've been, for 20 years or whatever. They can then go back to their cell and they can watch that video as many times as they want. and it will be permanently on their pads. Now, this is starting in September this year. So once we've got that National Prison Radio campaign and the ADHD support groups, that is the awareness raised massively in the English criminal justice system, massively. But I'm very sort of got a soft spot now for Australia, because they really are coming up very close. In fact, in one way, they're ahead of us, because as I say, Queensland police have been screening for nearly a year. And it's interesting because they've been finding, I'm getting exact figures from them. They've given me sneak preview figures. Sneak preview figures are 60% ADHD and 40% autistic. So that's the sneak preview that they said to me, you can have those now, but we'll give you the proper charts and graphs and everything when we've done it. But they're doing everybody. They're screening sex offenders. They're screening women. They're screening First Nations in Australia, yes, because they think there's quite a link with the First Nations. I mean, bearing in mind, this is a genetic thing. It would make complete sense. So I've had quite a lot of people in Australia say to me, we don't know whether we should say this, but we think there's quite a lot of ADHD in the First Nation people. And I'm like, yeah, it makes complete sense. When you go back to the real sort of back in time with ADHD, they say that ADHD people were the ones that were out of the caves, out there hunting, fishing, getting the meat and the food, and that's why they've survived. So we've survived longer. So it makes complete sense that the First Nation people, the ones that have got ADHD, would be the ones that have survived and are still with us. When you go back, I'm not very into science. I'm not into sort of the historical thing, but that bit I find fascinating, that we were the leaders, the camp leaders, we were out there, and it's only because of that, because of our absolute drive and our need to win, all the rest of it, that we've survived. So anyway, back to Queensland Police. They're doing amazingly. I am so pleased, and they're absolutely lovely people. But they realised this themselves about, oh my God, it must be 18 months ago that I started talking to Queensland Police. And then roughly a year ago, they started to screen, and they're just cracking on with it. They're not waiting for anybody to sort of, they're not waiting for this to come down from the government level, because that's just not happening. And it's interesting, but I've spoken to lots of people at government level. I've spoken to lots of MPs, and the ADHD ones are great. They're all for it. But the others, they don't get that there's this huge connection. So we've given up, really, from coming at it from the top down. We're now going from the underneath up. And going from the underneath up is fantastic, because we're talking to all these people who run addiction services, and I've got a real soft spot for addiction services and homeless services, because that was how I got into this, was through the homeless services. Now I realised all these homeless people that I was working with, the vast majority of them have got addiction problems. Not all, but the vast majority. And the vast majority have got ADHD. And I've only realised that in the last 10 years. I've been doing this for 30 years, working with those people. But I've gone back now and said, oh my God, I think you might, do this screener. And with addiction services, I've got a massive soft spot for them, because there are so many people who are desperate. So many people who are putting their lives at risk every day with what they're putting into their body, whether that is alcohol, drugs, food, whatever it is, to excess. And these people are absolutely desperate. Also they have incredibly low self-esteem, because they can't stop doing what they're doing, and they don't understand why. They don't understand about the compulsive element of the ADHD brain, which will force you to carry on and on and on. So addiction services, whenever we go and do a talk at an addiction service, it's absolutely mind blowing. I'll just give you one example. We went to one in Hemel Hempstead in Hertfordshire, and there were roughly 20 people in the room and 2 members of staff. And at the end of it, 19 people realised they were ADHD, and so did the 2 members of staff. There was only one man who said, I don't think this relates to me. I really don't think this relates to me. The other 19, half of them were in tears, absolutely broken, because they thought, oh my God, why did somebody not tell me this before I lost my house, my wife, my business, my car? Why did somebody not tell me this? So half of them are in tears. The other half have just got eyes so wide, because they cannot believe that there's actually a reason for this. It's not an excuse, but it is often a reason. So addiction services is just mind-blowing. And we've got lots of pilots going on with addiction services and homeless services and youth services, because there's so much, especially with youth services. We work with a lot of charities who are helping people. And in this country, I don't know if you use this phrase, we use a phrase fallen between the cracks. So if people have fallen between the cracks, that means they're not in education, they're not in employment, they're not in training of any kind. They're usually ex-care kids. They're usually people that have been in prison. They're often people that have been homeless. They're often people that have been fostered or adopted, and then at 18, they've just come out and got no support. So they've fallen through the cracks for whatever reason. And one of the pilots that we did in Liverpool, that was just breathtaking. The lady there, she's ADHD, and she'd realised that so many of these kids had ADHD. So she screened 100 people. Now, of those 100, 88 came out as highly probable for ADHD. And what she said was interesting. She said the boys, it wasn't a great surprise. A lot of them had either thought it or been told it, or, girlfriends had said, oh, for God's sake, you're so ADHD. But she said what was heartbreaking was the girls, because she said not one of the girls had a clue. And their life had gone, between the cracks for whatever reason. And she said most of the girls cried, and it was heartbreaking to watch them because they just had no clue. So we're trying, to do these pilots and trials in as many places as we can, because we're hoping with that, not only are we helping these people on the ground, which is massively important to me, but we're hoping that eventually the government will sit up and take notice. They have to take notice. That service, actually, the one in Liverpool, it's a youth careers service for people that have fallen between the cracks. But they've got places, locations all over the UK, and they're in some prisons. And when that pilot came out at 88 out of 100, the lady who did it, her boss's boss, who's very senior, he said, we're rolling this out across the whole of the UK. So that is like you talked about government links. This is a government linked youth careers service. So that is now rolled out. Everybody is going to be screened for ADHD, which is phenomenal. And I'm so grateful for them doing it. So really, any of your listeners, anybody who works in any of these services, whether it's youth, whether it's criminal justice system, whether it's addiction, homeless services, that's the prime places you find undiagnosed ADHD. Of course, it's everywhere. It's everywhere. But even if we just start with those people, because some of their circumstances are very, very desperate and life-threatening. And I like to work with the people that really need it, the ones that really, really, really need it. So anybody who wants to do a pilot, it doesn't cost a penny. We're not dictatorial about it. We don't say you've got to do this and you've got to do that. A lot of people say, oh, what have I got to do? And I'm like, well, whatever you'd like to do. Would you like to screen 100 people? Would you like to do it for 3 months? Would you like to do it for a month? Whatever figures you can give us, they're going to be valuable. And actually, people doing it different ways is really valuable. We don't want everybody doing it the same, because that's not going to flag up anything particularly interesting. So people that are doing just 100 people that are doing it for a month, we've got what are they called? A youth club, a very big youth club in North London. They're screening everybody, and they've been doing it for about 6 months. So we're waiting for their figures. So we've got all of this going on. And eventually, I pray to God the government will sit up and take notice, not just ours. I started with the UK. That was my first challenge. Now I want everywhere. Because whenever I talk to anybody, I spoke to a psychiatrist the other day. He said, Sarah, this is a major problem in Southeast Asia. I said, is it? Okay. I don't even think I know where Southeast Asia is, because my geography is rubbish. But he's saying it's a terrible problem. It's a massive problem in Southeast Asia. It's a problem everywhere. It's a problem everywhere that doesn't know about ADHD and doesn't take it seriously. It's a very, very serious psychiatric condition. And this is what people don't realise. People don't realise that we have roughly a 5 times higher risk of suicide, very approximately. We have a lower life expectancy. It's roughly 10 to 15 years, lower life expectancy. We have a much higher propensity to self-harm. We're very at-risk people, but people still think, it's just naughty boys, just behave. It's nothing to do with naughty boys and not behaving. It's a very serious psychiatric condition, and that's what people don't realise.
I want to ask you that exactly, because throughout what you just said, I picked up on one thing that kind of got me thinking. You say ADHD is genetic. It's a psychiatry issue. And when I listen to you say that, that means to me that if it's genetic, it's not something you have control over. Just in plain terms, it's not something that you can choose to behave this way or another way because, the genetics kind of precedes the choices to a certain extent. And you cannot choose to have ADHD or not to have ADHD because it's not something, it's genetic again. For example, it's just simple. And my question becomes, if it's genetic and if ADHD pushes people to act in a certain way or make certain types of decisions, then how are we really kind of judging on this? Because it's just bothering me so much that I can't put my sentences together, because for the first time
I think I know what you mean. I think I know what you mean. It's outrageous. You're quite right. It is outrageous.
It is difficult for me to start understanding this, because I'm just thinking there's somebody in jail right now who shouldn't be in jail. They should be in a hospital instead, or at a doctor.
Times that by thousands.
There you go. And then
tens of thousands. Yeah.
I'm thinking of large markets of prison systems and addiction problems of like the United States, for example, which is a huge market for all of the issues you just mentioned.
Absolutely. Yeah.
With a government that says, no, we're not going to open up to ADHD. And I'll tell you why. I really think one of the reasons is their worry of the slippery slope of this, because they may start thinking that, you know what, we have a business to run as a prison system, and this business is going to suffer and deteriorate if 6 or 7 out of 10 people who get arrested who are supposed to be sent here are instead going to the psychiatric ward of a hospital, another place, because now we're diagnosing them the right way. It's much better to just not diagnose them and say, you know what, you committed this crime, you're going to do 10 years. And then when you come for the second time and the third time, we put you in for life. And now we're guaranteed a certain income for the 50 years that you're going to be here. So it's really, destabilizing for the industry of kind of the prison industry as a business to introduce ADHD to the story. So it becomes very difficult.
Personally, I totally agree with that. And I think there's a second reason. And I think that is, I don't know, I can't talk for the rest of the world, but I will definitely talk for England, or the UK. There's going to be an outcry when the public realise that we've been locking up people. A lot of them have got autism, and the others have got ADHD, which is when they realise it's actually a serious psychiatric condition. It's the only psychiatric condition that comes with a lower life expectancy. It's the only one. If you've got bipolar, schizophrenia, any other condition, doesn't come with a lower life expectancy. ADHD does. And their conditions, they do come with a risk of suicide, but ours is much higher. It's a really serious condition. And you can't just, I think my gut feeling on this is there's going to be such an outcry from the public when they know, there is, when I talk to the public, they're all outcrying that this is disgusting, that we're locking up people with these conditions. And I don't think the government are ready for that. I think, again, it's almost going to be admitting they've made a mistake, that they've been not screening these people. They've been, like you've just said, they've come 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I've met boys who've, by the age of 21, they've been in prison 6 times because they can't stop doing what they're doing. And if only we'd diagnosed and medicated these people, they wouldn't be going anywhere near the prison system. And once that comes out on the large scale that it should, because this is a massive, massive problem, I think there's going to be a big outcry. I really do. So I think it's a combo of what you said and then the outcry. I really do think it's both.
And from the person's perspective, what happens with ADHD that kind of leads you to end up in jail, or like, what is that side of the story? Because I don't know, like the rest of the population, the majority, I don't really know the ins and outs of it. I know the basics, but what is it genetically that really says, steal, kill, or
I'll tell you. I mean, this is what people don't realise, and I'll say, neither did I until I was 51. When you have an ADHD brain that's not diagnosed, not medicated, you are very impulsive. Your brain is impulsive. So it will do things and say things without any thought at all. And just to give you an idea of that, in the mornings before I've taken my ADHD medication, if I'm on my phone and I start replying to emails, I will be really, what's the word? I won't be as nice as I would be 2 hours later,
rude.
when I've taken my medication, I will say things impulsively, to people. And I've stopped myself doing it now because I think, God, I could really get myself into trouble this first hour and a half, 2 hours that I've not been medicated. So an ADHD brain is always impulsive. It doesn't think before it speaks, or, before it tells a police officer to F off, or it kicks a stone and there you've got criminal damage. It doesn't think. It literally doesn't think. It's impulsive. But the other killer trait is that we don't think of the consequence of anything. So the very first day I took stimulant medication, I'll take a very quick story for you. I threw some keys down on the table and I looked at the keys and I thought, oh, don't leave them there, because if they fall down the back, you won't know where they've gone. And then I stood rooted to the spot with all the hairs going up and down on my back because I was 55 and that was the first time I'd thought of a consequence. Because I was on medication, I was 55. And that's when I suddenly realized, oh my God, all these boys in prison. I've got a lovely story for you, actually. It's in my book, The Prison Counselor. Mm-hmm. I was working with a boy who was about 26, 27. And he told me that he was in prison for stealing his 1,000th car. Yeah, his 1,000th car. So I was chatting away to him, and I knew a bit about ADHD by now. And I said, right, just be honest with me, totally honest. When you were just about to steal car number 1,000, did it enter your head that it might not be a great idea because you might end up here? We were currently sitting in a prison. And he thought about it. He really thought about it. He said, to be honest, Sarah, he said, no. He said, I didn't. He said, I walked past the car. I tried the door like you always do. And I thought, well, no, I don't, but maybe you always do. He tried the door. The door was open. And then he said to me with the widest eyes ever, he said, and the key was in the ignition. What was I supposed to do? And he just looked at me like this, and I thought, oh, bless your heart. That the next step didn't come to him. And I understand that. The next step was, but you don't want to go back to prison, and this is probably going to mean that you're going to get caught, so probably not a good idea. He never had those thoughts. No thought of the consequence whatsoever. So when people tell me, ask me rather, what gets ADHD people put in prison, those two traits, being impulsive, not thinking of the consequences, that accounts for about 80% of it. And the other 20% of it largely is because of our heightened sense of justice. So we have a very heightened sense of justice about anything that's unfair or wrong. Our brain just can't let it go. So if I give you a classic example of this, a long time ago, nearly 20 years ago now, I was working in a prison. There was an absolutely lovely man in there, about 35, very sophisticated, very well presented. He was from Europe, he had a beautiful accent. I couldn't imagine what this man was doing in prison. He looked so out of place amongst all the, the offender. He just looked so out of place. And one day I said, I hope you don't mind, but do you mind telling me why you're here? Because I just can't imagine, you shouldn't do that in a prison, but I kind of wanted to know because he just seemed so out of place. And he wanted to talk to me. So I said, do you mind me asking why you're here? Because you shouldn't be here, love, should you? And he said, no, I shouldn't. He said, I'm not a criminal. But what happened with him, he'd been in a pub with his sister, and his sister was getting hit on by a very drunk man. So this drunk man kept going and pestering the sister, pestering. And in the end, the brother had just got hold of this man and just thrown him away from the sister. Unfortunately, it was in a pub with a fire hearth, a concrete hearth. And this man had fallen on the hearth and cracked his head. There was no permanent damage or anything, but he'd hurt himself. So this man was in prison. I can't remember actually what he was on there for. Maybe in there for, I think it might have been ABH or something. But he got sent to prison for this one thing. He's not a criminal at all, but one thing. And that was, I don't know if he was ADHD. This was a long time ago. I didn't know much about it then, but he just couldn't let that go, that this drunk was pestering his sister and he just wanted to protect his sister. But I've met many, many, many boys and men in prison who have been there because of their heightened sense of justice. It can even be somebody looking at them the wrong way. Literally, what are you looking at? And then it just kicks off because somebody's looked at them the wrong way. Also, it can be exactly like that one, because somebody's disrespected your sister, disrespected your mum, disrespected somebody that you love. And if you're ADHD, that really inflames your sort of your heightened sense of justice. So there's a lot of people that are in prison because of that, and they have no clue that they're ADHD. None.
And now, if you're medicated, does this kind of balance out? I mean,
yes.
Shall we call that a cure? Is that what you're
Yes,
saying?
it's a cure. Oh, 100%.
Okay.
Any psychiatrist or doctor would tell you ADHD medication is the most efficacious of any
Mm,
medication, either psychological or physiological. It's the most efficacious. Yeah. And it's most efficacious because what it does is replace what's missing in the brain. So
mm,
we're born without enough dopamine. So the medication puts that dopamine in. So suddenly your brain isn't screaming at you all day for adrenaline, excitement, something nice. So
mm,
the brain that's screaming, it's usually satisfied by, with mine. I mean, I'm very, very lucky. The things I chose were the least damaging. So mine was food. I was much, much, much bigger when I was undiagnosed, and shopping. So I had I was overdrawn and a very, very poor credit rating for a very long time. But food and shopping are actually two of the healthier ways of doing it. The less healthy ways are alcohol, drugs,
mm,
gambling, and promiscuity. Because I'm a counsellor, when I was counselling, I worked with several men. It was always men who were very happily married and wanted to stay married. But they were doing all sorts of naughty, thrill-seeking, risk-taking, because that's another thing the ADHD brain wants. It
mm.
wants thrills, wants to take risk, it wants excitement. So these men who'd been married for sort of 20, 25 years, they were off doing stuff that their wife would have been absolutely horrified about, and they didn't know why. Now, when they came to me, years and years ago, I sort of very gently worked out, oh my God, I think this is ADHD, and I think this is why you're doing what you're doing. And then all of those, we got them diagnosed, and once they were medicated, their brain didn't need to risk take, didn't need to thrill seek. Very importantly, thought of the consequences, and they didn't want to lose their wives. So all of a sudden, they don't need to be promiscuous. But promiscuity really goes with ADHD, and so does gambling. I mean, I've worked with a couple, I mean, lots, but a couple that really stand out. One was in his 30s, one was in his 60s, but both of them lost everything. They lost their wives, their houses, their jobs, their cars, their money. They were massively in debt because of undiagnosed ADHD. And it's absolutely tragic that because neither of them knew at the time that it was ADHD driving their addiction, they lost the lot, both of them. It's absolutely tragic. So gambling is another thing that I'm very, very passionate about. In this country, we have the NHS gambling team, and they deal with only the very severe gamblers. To get in with them, you've got to be quite severe. And they came to us, it must have been between 2 and 3 years ago now. And they said, we've realized that pretty much all, if not all, of these very severe gamblers are ADHD. So now we look after the gamblers. We've got therapists that specialize in gambling addiction, and we can turn their lives around. But it's heartbreaking to see how they've lost so much because they weren't aware of adult ADHD. Absolutely heartbreaking.
And you know what? When you explain the gambling, the alcohol, the drugs, all the things that you're explaining on the negative side of it, I mean, I personally wouldn't put, say overeating or excessive eating and excessive shopping and stuff on the better side, although it's less problematic. But then
it's less damaging. But yeah, I know what you mean.
Directly damaging because if everybody went on an overconsumption binge, we'll probably die from climate change quicker than anything else. So I'm looking at this from a societal perspective now, and I'm thinking if the community, if the UK as a nation says, you know what, this is an actual thing. It's not fake. It's not some propaganda. It's medically proven that there is such a thing called ADHD, that we have a medical board that says, yes, it is a reality. Okay, great. What are the effects of this? Well, X amount of hundreds of billions of pounds a year in damaged properties, court time, and all the illegal activities, all the money launderings, all the killings, everything that happens in crime, and then the accidents with drunkenness and the promiscuity and all the trafficking.
And obesity costs us a fortune. Obesity costs us an absolute fortune.
And then obesity and all the medical side of things, and then the shopping and the overconsumption and the fluctuations in economies and the credit ratings of people that deteriorate their lives in other ways. All of this together could be resolved. How much is the medication? Just
if you're paying privately, very roughly £100 a month, very roughly.
Okay. £100 a month. if the country came together and said, we have, X amount of people who would be diagnosed with ADHD, let's put aside £100. Well, it wouldn't be £100 for the government. It'll probably be £30 for the government. Let's put that budget aside to kind of put this medication out there in the same way they did for silly things like, condom rollouts for free in many countries. I mean, it's not, nobody's going to go and rob a bank if they don't have access to a condom. But we give them that, right? Because we think about, planning and teen pregnancies and all those things, but it's not criminal. Absolutely. It's not a death sentence. Yet we have issues like ADHD that are death sentences that we're not reacting to from a policy perspective. So
100%.
This is where it gets really tricky. Pharma should want to help you because, they're selling the pills. So it's good for them.
And they do. We've got some good people. Can I just say one thing about obesity? I was roughly 20 stone before I was diagnosed with ADHD. And I'd had a gastric band put in. And when I got to know about ADHD, I kept thinking back to my gastric band nurse. Now, my gastric band nurse, she's a very high profile bariatric nurse. She's always on television. Whenever they're talking about obesity and weight loss procedures, all of this, she's absolutely the top person to go to. And she happened to be my gastric band nurse. I knew her quite well. And I went back to her and I said, I don't know, just do this test because she also had black bags under her eyes. Insomnia goes with ADHD as well because our brains don't stop. So insomnia can go with ADHD. She was always tired. I remember seeing these black bags and feeling so sorry for her. She did the ADHD test, came out very high. She's now diagnosed and medicated. It has been for about 3 years. But because she's very high profile in the bariatric world, she is pushing for everybody who wants weight loss surgery or, is on the waiting list for it to be screened for ADHD.
To first do that,
Yeah. So she's really pushing for that because she knows, I mean, she's worked with probably thousands of severely obese people, people that have really, incapacitated by being 20, 30 stone overweight. She's worked with some of these very, very people that just can't leave the house. They're so miserable, so desperate. And she now thinks that probably not all, but the vast majority of these have got undiagnosed ADHD. And I make a big point. I mean, possibly not very popular for this, but I do make a big point. If I'm ever on holiday and there's a very, very overweight person, I will always go and speak to them on their own, one-to-one. And I will always say, look, please don't take this the wrong way. But do you know anything about adult ADHD? Some of them, usually they say, a little bit, what? And I say, I was a very big compulsive and binge eater before I was diagnosed. And I hated myself. I absolutely despised myself because I could go for weeks being really good. And then I'd eat one Volivon or something. I'd be gone. I'd be just eating. I couldn't stop. Didn't realize that was this. As soon as you feed it something it likes, whether that's alcohol, drugs, in my case, Volivons and food, it screams. I'm loving that. I want more. It's impossible not to become some sort of addict with ADHD. This is an interesting fact. If you don't self-medicate in some way with drink, drugs, food, gambling, shopping, exercise, whatever, can actually make you quite mentally unwell. And I've worked with 2 clients who weren't self-medicating at all. And they were both quite mentally unwell. And by that, I mean, hearing voices, seeing things, believing they were being attacked by aliens. The psychosis had really kicked in because they weren't self-medicating. So much as, I've got a quick story for you, actually. I think you'll quite like this. One of my clients, when we're going back to being genetic, a boy I counselled, sadly, he'd already been arrested by the time he came to me. So sadly, he went to prison. But I kept saying to the mum, this is genetic. He's not got it from, and she kept saying, no, I'm not. And his dad's not, I don't know where he's got it from. It's just come. I'm like, it can't just come. It can't. Anyway, eventually she said to me, okay, would you have a session with his dad? Because his dad doesn't understand his brain, doesn't understand why this boy has done all of this stuff and, got put in prison at 18. And I had the session with the dad. Within 5 minutes, I said, it's you. It's come from you. Because he was a workaholic. So he said, "Oh, I'm up at 6. I go to the gym every day. I'm at my desk by 7. I'm never home before 7 o'clock at night. Then I'm in my office." And I said, "It's you." I said, "Do you know that being," he actually said to me, "You'd probably categorize me as a workaholic." And I said, "Well, possibly, but do you know that that is you self-medicating?" So by the end of the hour, we'd worked out that this is where the ADHD's come from. It's come from the dad, that the dad didn't go off drug dealing like the son did. The dad was just a massive workaholic. So overworking over anything is basically linked to ADHD. If you're doing anything, including exercise. I know somebody who used to drink a bottle of wine every day and 2 on a Saturday and Sunday. She then gave that up about 10 years ago, and she developed an exercise addiction. So she went from 17.5 stone to 8 stone, and she now exercises religiously and counts calories religiously. Now, she's a classic example. She's a scientist. Because she's a scientist, she doesn't believe she can have ADHD, because she thinks ADHD is for thick people. It's not. It's for everybody. But she's replaced one addiction with the other. And that's what will happen with most ADHD people. They might be able to give up cigarettes or coffee or whatever they're self-medicating with. They'll always pick up something else. One boy I know was a heroin addict. He's only in his early 30s, but he'd been on heroin since he was about 16, 18. He managed to get off that and gave it up. But he's now drinking a bottle of rum a day. It is very difficult when you're ADHD not to replace an addiction with something else. It can be a healthier thing, which is good, but you'll probably replace it with something else until you're diagnosed and medicated. And then once you've got that most efficacious medication that there is in your brain, it regulates everything again. Yeah, it really does regulate. So in answer to your question, yes, it is the answer. Yes, it is a magic pill. And boys that I've had I'll give you one example. A boy had been in prison 16 times by the age of 29, and all his crime was to do with alcohol. So it was either stealing alcohol, being drunk and disorderly, a fray, ABH for fighting. It was all connected to alcohol. When he was arrested again, I said to the mother, this isn't a client, it's actually the son of a friend of mine. I said, "I'm sure that boy's ADHD. Can I just see him? Please let me see him." I saw him. We got him diagnosed. We got him medicated. He's now about 32, 33, and he's out. He's not costing us a penny. He's not in prison. He's out and he's medicated. And he cannot believe that nobody picked his ADHD up. Nobody.
That is frustrating, to lose your life and to realize it was all lost for one pill.
Yeah, exactly.
That was available
he lost all his 20s. He lost all his 20s and his late teens
for because £100 a month. For £1,000 a year, you could have had all your dreams realized and kind of lived to achieve them, at least to try to achieve them. Versus for £1,000 a year, you're guaranteed not to have anything going for you.
Yeah, so absolutely. As I say, all the boys I've worked with who've been in prison, who are now out, once they're diagnosed and medicated, touch wood, not one of them has gone back to prison. Because in fact, one of them, the one who'd been in prison 16 times, he's stopped drinking completely. He's got no desire for alcohol at all now. He just drinks non-alcoholic stuff. But he said to me that he never ever would have thought that his brain would have felt like this, and this doesn't understand why he did all those things he did. He just doesn't understand it, because that wasn't really him, and now he's medicated. He's got no desire to drink or fight or steal or anything. Just no desire.
You know what? I think this is a classic example of what we've seen throughout human history and kind of discovery. Go back 200 years and, people didn't know as much as we know today. Go back 400 years, they knew even less. But, throughout the eras, you kind of realize, we found out about autism in this year. We found out about, how to do this in that year. We found out what a heart attack is in such a year. And so then it takes maybe few years or decades. I mean, look at AIDS. People are living with AIDS now, whereas just in my lifetime, when I remember when I was young and like when I was 6, 7 years old, parents were so scared of the kids touching anything, going anywhere, because we didn't have the education. People thought AIDS comes from anything. Like, you touch a toilet seat, you get AIDS, right? So there was this fear. And today, most teens know how AIDS is contracted and everything else, because the education is so out there and it's so public now and it's everywhere. And, science caught up with the issue and they've pretty much cured, the issue, and we're so far advanced.
Thank God.
We're speaking a matter of, less than 50 years that we really did that. I think here I'm speaking with you at a time when in 30 years from now, people will not have these conversations, because I'm pretty sure that, as the science rolls out, everybody's going to look at this and say, it is just safer to diagnose this, and it's safer to medicate this, because
I 100% agree. I think we're at the beginning of it.
The trajectory is there. Yeah, the trajectory seems to be there, because it's not some weird science or conspiracy theory issue or anything like that. It's just facts and, proof and reactions of these facts. I mean, it's exactly like cancer or AIDS or anything else. I mean, here's the issue, here's the science of it, here's the proof of it. We take all of this, we go to policy, we show them this is the situation, and the industry comes together and says, okay, how do we solve this, and how do we bring it to the educators, and how do we bring it to the global staff systems?
Yeah, can I just say something on that? Something massively important. ADHD is linked to sex offending. Now, every neurodiversity manager I speak to in every prison says to me in very hushed tones, Sarah, we think there's more ADHD on our sex offender wing than anywhere else. And I say, you're probably not wrong, because now that's the risk-taking, thrill-seeking element of ADHD. We're constantly pushing boundaries, constantly looking for something more exciting, something more dangerous, something that's going to give us this adrenaline. So I've worked with a few sex offenders, and actually one part of Queensland Police, their sex offending team are screening now, because they've realised that the vast majority of these people have got ADHD. So to protect children, I always say to people, mandatory screening in education, right from the age of 5, if it's necessary for only one reason, is to pick up the potential sex offenders. It's to pick them up when they're young, diagnose them, medicate them. And then we've got, I don't know, we won't know yet what the success rate is, but I would imagine it's going to be very, very high, that these people will no longer need to risk take and thrill seek. Right, and our children are going to be safer. It's as simple as that.
On both sides, right? I mean, you're protecting the person who, say, is getting raped, and you're protecting the person who's going to rape as well.
100%.
They both deserve
100%.
to be protected. Yeah. And to think that the government is not responding to you as of right now just drives me crazy now.
Yeah, it's mad. It's mad. And I'll tell you another thing.
It's safer to give them a pill than to put a police officer in every park.
Yeah, and the other thing, see, a lot of people say, "Oh, you're so obsessed with the offenders, and you're always wanting to help the offenders." Yeah, I am. But if you've got less people offending, what does that mean? That means less crime,
right?
Yeah, safer. That means less houses getting broken into, less people being mugged, less people being robbed. This is going to protect the public massively.
Right.
So, what's not to love?
It's so much cheaper, and it's so much more. Guaranteed, so to speak, in a way, because, again, at £1,000 a year, per, criminal, you're giving that person a productive life in society. So they're going to definitely pay back that $1,002 through taxes and everything else, because they have something going for them now. So it's an investment that has multiple fold return. From an investment perspective, from a social perspective, this person is not stealing cars or raping. So now, those are much better off.
Yeah, I hate to say it as well, but some of the ADHD people are out there murdering. I hate to say it.
Yes, but you're saving all of these issues.
Yeah, I watch a lot of television. I watch a lot of documentaries, and I see we had a very high profile murder in this country last summer, where 3 people were murdered in the same house, and when they showed the boy that did this, he's only, I think, 26, 27. It was very obvious that he's ADHD. His brother is actually in prison for murder. Yeah. And the brother is in prison for murder because somebody touched his car. And this bloke was so outraged that somebody touched his car. He drove and he mowed them down and he killed them. That's the brother. Now, this other brother this last summer murdered 3 people. And I'm actually going to get on to of the family. There were 5. There's only 2 left now. But they've been very vocal about how this boy is scum, filth, dirt, hopeless, useless, and I agree with them. He's taken away 3 members of their family. I get that, but I'm going to get in touch with them because, and break it to them extremely gently, that there's so many red flags for ADHD in this brother, and there's red flags for the one that's already in prison for murder. That's 4 people in total that have been killed by 2 brothers, and it's very, very obvious that they are ADHD. Now, you know, that man, luckily the dad is quite big at the BBC. He's within the BBC. So I'm hoping, once I've broken this to him extremely gently, that, because obviously this is heart-rendering to know that your 3 members of your family were potentially killed because nobody had screened these kids in school and got them diagnosed and medicated. So the havoc, the mayhem that these 2 brothers have caused, they're both now in prison. You know, they've got 4 deaths between them. And I absolutely know from reading about them, they are both ADHD. But there's been no mention of it, so I'm sure they're not diagnosed and medicated. But potentially, if we'd have screened those and medicated, 3 members of that family would still be alive. How heartbreaking is that?
And even if we do that now, thousands of more people will be alive by
100%,
publicizing
100%. Yeah, 100%. I mean, I've started to talk about this now because it's in my book. I haven't spoken about it before, but I was abused. It was sexual abuse, but it was quite mild compared to what some people go through. I was 10 years old, and it was by one of my stepfathers. I had several, and it was by one of them, and he was diagnosed at the time as paranoid schizophrenic. Now, both his children, he's my stepfather, but both his children are diagnosed with inattentive ADHD. And I 100% know that man had inattentive ADHD. I know for a lot of other reasons, but I can speak as, you know, I'm 61 now. As a 10-year-old, I went through things that I shouldn't have gone through. And that was because somebody hadn't been assessed at school, diagnosed and medicated. A lot of the stuff that he was doing was most definitely risk-taking and thrill-seeking. Most definitely. You know, I look back and I think, my God. Now, I'm lucky I escaped with very, very, very mild abuse compared to some of the people that I've worked with, you know, absolutely horrendous, what some have been through. But if you think about protecting children, as I say, that alone should be enough for us to be screening, for screening to be mandatory. That alone should be enough. But also, if we want to protect the public from crime, we need to be screening. If we want to stay, I mean, in this country, we're constantly building new prisons. You know, let's build another prison, let's lock them. For God's sake, just get the mental health right in the prisons that you've got. Start screening them, diagnosing and medicating them, and you're 3/4 empty the place. You don't need new prisons. Locking them up and throwing away the key is not helping anybody.
If you start much earlier, you're preventing all of this conversation that you're having right now.
100%.
Right?
Yeah, 100%.
We wouldn't be having this conversation if that's where it needs to be important. Yes, that's the next stage. That's really the next stage of kind of doing that. And I'm definitely going to work with you, because after
bless you.
But you know what? After listening to you and kind of understanding the social, connection of this issue. It's so much bigger, because here I am, raising millions to help people here and homeless people there and all this other things and refugees and crimes and whatnot. And I'm thinking to myself, gee, you know what? Probably half of that population could have been helped with £1,000 a year per person. So it's a lot cheaper than trying to continuously feed, 20,000 homeless people day in and day out. So, or building homes for the homeless who could really get back on track. Because when I was in Toronto, in Canada, I used to help homeless people personally, not through shelters. I used to just get them back on their feet, and I'd get them back on their feet, and they were doing well. I mean, I remember, when you're telling these stories, my stories are popping in my head. I remember one person. I used to come down from my office and grab lunch with him. He was homeless and he sat in front of my building. I used to go grab lunch with him because he had really cool stories, because he had a good life, and it he destroyed his own life. Yeah. And so I helped him back on his feet, and he was a framer. So I had a friend who had a construction company. I said, can you just put him somewhere? Just give him a job, even if I have to pay for the hours. Like, no, I need a framer. I was like, perfect, test him out. So, I put him in an apartment. I paid for it, and got my friend to hire him. He's like, he's really well, and he's meticulous, and he works really well, and everything's fine. I love it. About 3 months later, he stopped showing up for work. A couple of days went by. My friend thought, hey, maybe he's sick, maybe whatever. I'll give him a call. Gives him a call. No answer. Calls me and says, Ali, do you know where he is? And I said, no, I haven't spoken with him in a month or so. I don't see him anymore. So I don't really interact. And so I tried to get in touch with him. Nothing. So I showed up at the apartment and he's not even there. Here and there, and I start getting worried. So the cops got involved, and I said, hey, this person's non-existent anymore. We can't find him. He's almost across the country by the time they were able to find him, because he had kind of tagged into a couple of shelters and stuff on his trip. And, he was halfway across the country. So when they found where he is, and obviously I had no rights to him. I mean, I wasn't his caretaker or anything like that, so I had no legal rights, but I wanted to know what happened. So, I got in touch with him. I found a way to get in touch with him. And I said, what happened? And he's like, I don't know. And I was like, what do you mean? I don't know. I got you a place. And I'm like, what do you mean? I don't know. Literally, he's telling me, I don't know. And I said, but you can't tell me I don't know. Why did you leave? And so anyways, I'm like, what are you doing? And he's in Edmonton. Like the distance is huge. It's like from one end of the UK to the other, literally, going from Southampton to Glasgow. Imagine that, right? And he's done that trek by himself. And just hopping in cars and things and whatever.
Itchy feet, can I just say? Yeah. Very ADHD. Then, we always got to move.
and then I told him, what are you doing? And, he said, nothing. I'm just homeless again. And I said, well, that's why you're homeless, because, you don't. And then I didn't know any better. So I said, you're irresponsible. You don't think of the consequences and all the things you just are telling me right now. Right. So I was putting it on him instead of saying, here's $100 worth of pills that you got to take every day, and you're going to be fine. You're going to be the best framer. You're going to have a decent job. You're going to have a life. You're going to have a family, and you're going to have all of that. But instead, he's going through so many risks, because I'm thinking right now that trek, he could have got in a lot of trouble. Going
but
through.
Something you just said is so true. Self-sabotage. ADHD people will self-sabotage all the time, and they don't understand why they do it. So when he said, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. He probably didn't know. Yeah. It's like this house that I'm sitting talking to you from now, where my office is, this is the house I've owned longest, because every house I moved into, I was like, where am I going to go next? This is all right for now, but where's next? Now, I didn't know that was my brain that was going, well, this is okay, but I'm sure you can find better. Whereas this house, this house, I've lived in for 9 years. And it's the only house I've lived in for 9 years, because I'm now medicated, So I understand why these people, and they do know that they self-sabotage. This is why people with ADHD have got very low self-esteem, because people try and help them with their addiction, with their homelessness issue, and they will always cock it up, they will. Mm-hmm. And largely that is due, what you've just spoken about, it's itchy feet. So he would have liked to have thought that was a perfect job and a perfect apartment, and he would have loved it for a short while, absolutely loved it, and been massively grateful and loved it. But his brain would have kept saying, okay, but we've been here 2 months now. What else? What else? Our brains are always asking, what's better than this? Mm-hmm. So he would have thought, I need to go now. I just can't stay here. I need to move. And if he stuck it for 3 months, that's quite amazing, because his brain would have been saying that from day one. But he still stuck it out, because he knew it's what he wanted to do and what he was supposed to do. But when you're ADHD, your brain, it's a lot of people say to me, can you not just override it? Can you not just know that's the ADHD and override it? And I always say, well, not really. You've got one brain. Some people say to me, is that his ADHD or is that his normal brain? And I say, well, how many brains do you think we've got? We've only got one, and it's an ADHD brain. And if our ADHD brain isn't medicated, all these traits are going to be untethered, as I say. They're just going to be raging. And a lot of people have that itchy feet thing. I did. I massively had it. I was constantly moving, constantly changing jobs. My dad was the same. My dad was ADHD. He never stuck a job for more than 6 months, but he was brilliant at all of them, and they loved him. And then he used to go back to companies because they loved him so much, and he was so brilliant at sales. And then he'd get bored with that and go off and do something else. My dad was screaming ADHD. So we can only stick things. When I was working in offices, I used to manage 9 months. And that used to kill me, just getting to the 9 months. I could never get to a year. because I was like, well, there's better out there. There's better money, better hours, better this, better that. So people that have been, that are homeless, that plays into it hugely. I've done a lot with the homeless that's how I got into helping people 30 years ago. And I used to mentor homeless people in London. Classic case of one girl. They got her a flat and they gave her a budget to spend on, getting the flat sorted. And I helped her with everything. We went shopping and we bought beds and we bought washing up bowls and we bought everything. And the last day when we'd got everything and it was all beautiful, I said to her, right, I said, I think we're done. I'm still going to stay in touch with you and whatever you need, I'm around, but I think you're sorted now. And this is absolutely stunning. We got the flat looking absolutely beautiful. And as I was going, she said, can I have a lift? And I said, okay, you can. Where do you want to be dropped off? And she wanted to be dropped off back with her homeless mates in the centre of London because she just couldn't stay in that flat on her own. She had itchy feet. Literally, the day we got it finished, she was ready to go somewhere else. And that's what people like you and me who've helped homeless people, when you don't understand that most have got ADHD, perhaps not all, but, we'll see. We've got homeless pilots going on with quite a few of the big homeless charities in England, a Big Issue and the Crisis, the two big ones. But it gets very frustrating for people that are helpers because they can't understand why these people, once you've cleared all the barriers, you've got them on the benefits, right. You've got them in a flat, you've got all the stuff, you've got the curtains, you've got everything, and then they screw it up within a few weeks, months. So I was okay. I didn't get exasperated. It happened to me a lot, but I didn't get exasperated too much. But I can understand why people do. I've got friends, who've bent over backwards to help somebody who's been homeless and get them into accommodation and they've really bent over backwards. And then they get very distraught when a month, 2 months later, that person's gone. They get very distraught.
It hurts the support too, because I'll tell you something. A lot of people are not supporting charities anymore because they're seeing this revolving door of the issue and they say, here I am giving my hard-earned money to support the homeless. And here is the homeless problem just mushrooming out of, everywhere in the world, not just in the UK. Yeah. So why am I doing this? And then they think there is some corruption going on. And so they, like me, decide I'm going to do this myself. And then they go and help a few people. And then that backfires as well. And they say, the hell with them because they don't want to be helped. And that becomes the norm. And then you're just really helping advance the problem as opposed to being part of the solution. But, when that's the most important thing about education. When we have education, we can actually make the right decisions. And
it doesn't take long. I mean, we've been on this call for like an hour, maybe just an hour and a bit. Yeah. And now hopefully you understand the link with addiction, with homelessness, with offending. It doesn't take long to educate people.
It could honestly be 5 minutes condensed for one person to sit there and give the bulk of the education of it, enough so that it rewires your mind about the way you're looking at the world. Okay. And then after that, it will open doors where you'll go and educate yourself because then it becomes interesting and it becomes something like, I need to learn more. But
I think on that, I'm really glad that I was a counsellor in the prisons because the boys and girls in the prisons, they don't have a voice largely, but because I'm a white middle class-ish homeowner, business owner, never done drugs, never been in prison, never even smoked. I'm terribly boring. Never done anything like that. And people have to go, oh, hello. She's got ADHD and yet she's not in prison. She's not an addict. She's not homeless. She's not robbing. She's not, and that makes them sit up and suddenly think, oh, hello. And this is why I'm so passionate about my boys in prison because people are judging them without understanding them. They don't understand that these boys were
you have a responsibility. You have a duty because of exactly what you just explained of who you are and how people see you. I think you have that much more of a duty, of a social duty to change the world in that perspective because you can do it. Like you said, the people in prison, they're not the ones who are able to voice and come out and say, hey, we need this kind of help. Here's research I've done. Even if they are doctors in prison, that voice is just eliminated. But 100%. People like yourself are the ones who say, you know what? I have the freedom. I have the balance now. I understand it because I deal with it and I have the means to be able to change the world from this perspective, which is a huge change. I mean, you're talking about very, very serious issues resolved or minimized, to just the minimization factor of it is insane.
That's a good word. Yeah, that's a very good word. You are talking about minimizing so many areas that cost governments and the public so much money. It's so much
and fear. And all those social issues. I mean, you can tie this all the way to environmentalism. I mean, the excessive shopping and eating and stuff. I mean, the gambling, the addiction. You can tie all of this to everything that we're going through in the world in some way. So.
Absolutely.
People are going to hear Sarah Templeton and Compassiviste collaborations, because I really want to be involved in the voicing of this, across the world, because we have platforms in Latin America, US, UK, and EU, and the Middle East, and India. So, you're right. The education is nowhere, as far as I'm concerned right now, because if I can't see it on my social media or everywhere I go, for me, it's nowhere. I shouldn't, as a regular person, I shouldn't be in a library trying to figure out what ADHD is, or online to get that education. It should hit me in the face first, and then I can continue with it. And it's not hitting me in the face. That's the problem.
Yeah. Well, I'm with all due respect, trying to hit as many people in the face as I can, because like you've said, this impacts literally every area of society, every single one. Yeah. People that have had their house, now touch wood, I've never had my house burgled, but I know I would never feel safe again in my home if it had been robbed. Touch wood, I never have been. But all those people that are living in fear or having to move because they don't feel safe in their own homes anymore. If they knew that, let's even say 85%, that's where our figures are, by the way. All the pilots are coming out between 80 and 90%. So if it's, let's say 85, as a very rough figure, 85% of those people terrified because they've had their houses robbed, they wouldn't be terrified. If 85% of them wouldn't be, that's a huge figure. Then think about kids who are being abused. If 85% of them weren't abused, this, like you say, this is massively minimizing it. I appreciate that it might not get rid of it completely. A phrase that we're big into at the moment is the school to prison pipeline. Now, the school to prison pipeline is rammed with ADHD, absolutely rammed. We're working with a school in Nottingham for approved kids. Now, I went to see them about 6 months ago, and once they'd realised that the bloke who owns it, his daughter had just got diagnosed, and he said, "My God," he said, "when I was filling out the forms for my daughter," he said, "I've just realised that I think all these kids are ADHD." He's got 30 kids. And he said, it's the same kids coming back to school, coming back to school, coming back. He said the same ones. So when I went up there, it ended up being a sort of a training session for an hour and a half. Lovely, lovely people. They'd realised that 6 out of the 7 teachers were ADHD. Of course they were, because they care and they work in the caring thing. But this man, a lovely man, he said, "I will do a pilot for you," but he said, "It's going to be bloody quick because I think it's all of them." And what he's doing is he's going through them one at a time, and he's trying to help the families of these kids who are ending up in the approved schools. And one of them, this is a classic example, one of them is a mum of a 14-year-old girl. And when he rang her and said, "We've done a screener on your daughter and she's come out very high for ADHD," the mum burst into tears and said, "Thank you so much." She said, "I've been trying since my daughter was 6. She's now 14. Yeah. So I've been trying since my daughter was 6 to get people to realise that she wasn't just naughty. There was something else going on. But nobody has listened from the age of 6 till this girl is 14 and she's in a very rough approved school. So he's going through all these kids one by one and speaking to the parents and explaining it and trying to get them diagnosed. Now, what he said is that he wants that screening in every approved school because those kids are on their way to prison. He said of those 30s, I can see a heck of a lot of them on their way to prison unless we do something now. So he's doing something now. Brilliant, man. And when he's done it, he wants it rolled out to all the excluded schools in England. And so do we, because that's going to stop the kids on it's an incredibly slippery slope. He's got one boy of 13 who's already been arrested twice. you know? And this boy's all over Facebook, apparently, because he's risk-taking and thrill-seeking and doing crazy things, and everybody's following him because he's such a mad loon, you know? And the manager of the school, he said, please, God, can we please get him assessed and diagnosed? Because he said, that kid is on his way to prison. I know he is. And my charity, we've stepped in there and we're getting him diagnosed because he's only 13. I don't want him, you know, in prison at 15. I've seen 14, 15-year-olds go to prison and they're all ADHD and they've all risk taken and thrill-seeked and not thought of the consequence and been impulsive, and bang, before they know it, they're in prison. And I hate that. I hate it because all the people that I've worked with in prisons, nearly all of them are lovely. I know that makes me sound a bit naive, but of course there are some hard, horrible people in there. There are, of course, but the vast majority are not bad people. They've done bad, silly things because of their ADHD brain. But when you sit down with them and talk to them, they've got very low self-esteem. They hate themselves for what they've done. Absolutely hate themselves. One of them, this is a classic story for you, really quick. A boy, he said to me, I can sit here and talk to you, Sarah, and this is when I was in a prison, Young Offender Institute, and he said, I can be the grown-up person, the sensible person that I want to be. He said, but when I'm at home, he said, if I walk past a bag that's open and I see a purse, I know I'm going to take it, and I can't stop myself, and I hate that I do that. I don't want to be that person. Now, he, classically, was a boy who was diagnosed ADHD at the age of 6. I then worked with him in prison when he was 21, and he'd been on ADHD meds and then been taken off them. Because a lot of these boys and girls are told that by people that still don't understand ADHD, that ADHD is a childhood behavioural disorder and you don't need the meds when you are a grown-up. So the prisons are chock-a-block with these boys who are between sort of 19 and 22,
because they
who've all been taken off their meds. They've been taken off their meds by GPs who don't understand this is not a childhood behavioural disorder. So that's another big problem. You know, the prisons are rammed with people who've come off the meds.
Shouldn't be there. Right.
Yeah, they shouldn't be there. They're nice people on the whole, you know, and as I say, I've said this in my book, you don't have to hate these prisoners because most of them hate themselves far more than you could ever do. They despise themselves, you know, for what they do because they just can't stop doing it and they don't understand why. And they think that makes them a lowlife, you know, a scum because they just can't stop doing it. And when you explain to them about ADHD, I've had numerous of them say to me, I'm not looking for an excuse, Sarah. I've done what I've done. You know, and I'm like, yes, you've done what you've done. We accept that. But actually, if it's because your brain was pushing you to risk take and thrill seek and get adrenaline and, you know, not think of the consequences and hating authority, that's another thing. ADHD people don't like authorities. We don't like being told what to do. So I always say to them, you know, it's possibly a reason. It's not an excuse. No, you did it. We accept that you did it. But it's potentially because your brain wasn't medicated and wasn't, you know, back on an even playing field, they say, once you've got the medication in. And it takes these boys a hell of a lot of time to forgive themselves. When they come out of prison and we get them diagnosed and medicated, they still loathe themselves way more than anybody else could. We don't have to hate them. They do a blooming good job of it themselves. But a lot of what I do is working with them on the outside, getting them on the meds and rebuilding their self-esteem, you know, because it's been absolutely shot to bits. They've been told by officers that they're scum, that they totally belong in prison. They'll be back. You know, oh yeah, see you in a week. You'll be back. They've got no self-esteem at all. So building it up when you've had that, I mean, let's take the one who's now 32, 33 and in prison up until 29, have been in prison 15 times. His self-esteem was on the floor, absolutely on the floor. And he took him at least 2 or 3 months to even accept that he'd got ADHD. He just couldn't accept it. He just couldn't believe. He also couldn't believe that he'd been in prison since he was about 17 to 29 and it had never been picked up in prison. Never even mentioned. And he was actually a prolific self-harmer. His arms are shot to pieces. And he said, but I was in healthcare nearly every day, having my wounds seen to. And he said, why did, you know, surely if I'd got it, surely they'd have mentioned it then. I'm like, unfortunately not. It would be nice to think that surely they would have done, but no. And this is going back to the money. It's very approximately £1,000 a year to medicate somebody. And it's very approximately £48,000 to keep somebody in prison. Now, if you think of the cost of that, and let's say even 80% of them are ADHD, let's make it really realistic, 75% at least. 75%, and it's costing us nearly 50 grand per person. And if we got them out, even if they were on free NHS meds, we're only giving them a grand's worth of medication. Never mind cutting the crime rates. So it just doesn't make, like you say, it just doesn't make sense. But I'm hoping.
Yes. And you know what? On that note, exactly, I want to stop the conversation and start the action, because this is a place where
I love action.
I understand what you're saying. I hear it loud and clear. The math makes sense. The math that you just gave me made sense. And, the social side of it makes sense. And that's what Compassiviste is about. I started this movement to raise compassion actively. Not to talk about it, not to put a post up on social media and say, oh, I'm compassionate because I'm going to voice my opinion. No, you got to do something about it. You can't talk about it all day. And so on that note, what I want every viewer, everybody in the audience to know is keep your eyes on Sarah's site, on our site, because we're very soon going to roll out something together, because I can't not be involved when I know this is one of the angles of minimizing the negativities that we see in the social world in every aspect of it. I mean, I can even take this as far as even animal welfare and rights as well, because God knows what some of these people are, how they're harming animals, or how they're kind of, causing, crazy things happening in farms and everything else. And you can stop that as well. A lot of people in the agricultural world, there's a lot of animal crime. And they're stealing their animals for joy. I had a farmer who was telling me once, an American farmer, he said, I have to watch out more for drunken kids coming and cow tipping and all these other issues that they do at the farm and saving the animals than I do with other serious issues that I should be taking care of. So now I'm thinking, even those kids who at 2 a.m. in the morning are thrill seeking and coming to the farm and chasing bulls around are probably ADHD. So we're going to save some animals too. So every angle I look at this is just returning me to that. So Sarah Templeton, thank you very much for this enlightening conversation on Compassiviste Dialogues. It was amazing having you here. I want to thank you for your courage, your voice, this unwavering dedication that you have to making the world better. Through, the education and the action that we need to take for ADHD. And, this relentless fight that you have for the awareness, the education, the justice reform that we need, the policy changes. I got to say, it makes you a true compassiviste, because that's all it's about. If every person was going to advocate for something to make our world a better place, then, we're all a bunch of compassionate activists trying to say, hey, here's what I'm bringing to the table. This is what I've learned. This is what I know. This is my bag. So you're here for a purpose, and you're actually pulling through with your purpose. You didn't become, a chef who forgot about their ADHD and just working in their restaurant and let it go and medicate themselves. No, you said, I was lucky enough to medicate myself. I was lucky enough to come off the brink, but I'm going to make sure other people don't end up in the situation that could be much worse. So I appreciate that you understand a broken system and you're dedicating your life to fixing it. And we really want to be a part of it here at Compassiviste, so we will.
Amazing! I'll take all the support we can get, but it's a growing voice, but it's still nowhere near loud enough. So any support will be massively appreciated.
And for everybody watching, hearing, the links are below. Please visit Sarah Templeton's sites and let's get this conversation into action so we can make some change together. We're here to help the world together. I'm Ali Horiat.